All right, so welcome everyone. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a PowerPoint just to go over the more broad concepts, but then we will move into the actual software demo. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, sorry, I put everything in a weird place. So I'm having to scooch everything over. Okay, there we go. So user-defined fields. Um, as Amanda said, these are also referred to as cost centers. Generally, they will be referred to as cost centers in ATR, but in the client, they're referred to as user-defined fields. They're not custom fields. Some people refer to them as custom fields. Custom fields are fields that are completely created from scratch. They're added to the database. You're altering the tables to add a field. With user-defined fields, these fields are already created. They already exist in CribMaster. It's just that we're giving you the option to name them and to populate what choices people have when they encounter these fields sort of out in the wild. So what we're going to cover is first we're going to talk about how user-defined fields are used both in ATR and in the client. We're going to look at some examples. We're going to look at more advanced features on what you can do with user-defined fields, and then we will go into the live demo. When we look at how people usually use these user-defined fields, one of the primary purposes is to add some additional transaction details. So if you're not using user-defined fields and you have people issuing items, CribMaster does record a good bit of helpful information, such as what item is being issued, when the issue took place, what crib bin did it come out of, who did the actual issuing and who did the issue it to, date, timestamp, item price, a lot of good information. But if you need to record some sort of non-traditional or proprietary information that isn't normally included, that's where the user-defined field would come into play. So there's some examples of some fields that some people might set up in their environment to help capture some additional information. Of course, your user-defined fields might look completely different. It's well, they're user-defined. So another perk of using UDFs is that you can report on them. Just like any other field in the database, you can run reports and metrics against your user-defined fields. So if you're trying to run financial reports or reports about item usage, you can definitely use those to set up your reporting and to get data out. Now, another perk is about compliance. What we're looking at in the screenshot there is the defaults tab of an employee's properties. So you can lock in or hard code user-defined field responses. For example, if I know Barry, he's working in department 1002, I'm going to go ahead and lock him into that. That way he doesn't have to select it when he logs into ATR. It saves a little bit of time. And I'm reducing the possibility that he might select the wrong department by mistake, or maybe he just gets lazy and selects the first one available. Now, another thing to note with this screenshot, you guys may notice that most of those user-defined fields have a selection button. It's that three dot button right there. That's how they would pick the actual response. But one of them does not have that. It's a type in. So that is those are the two ways that you can enter information using user-defined fields. You can have it open freeform. And the freeform fields are just as reportable as anything else. So you can also set spending levels with user-defined fields. If you look at the example in the screenshot, I've got week to date $50. That means that if a user comes in and they select jet engine as their department, if they try to issue more than $50 worth of items in a particular week, it will red flag it. And you can take the additional step of actually enforcing that limit, meaning that nobody who has that same department number will be able to get a higher dollar value of items. Now that is overridable. by a manager, but it is an option where you can lock down or give an allowance to how much money can be spent for a particular department or cost center. And then asset management. For those of you who are using preventive maintenance, you can turn UDF responses into assets, and you can track and manage the maintenance if you're using our preventive maintenance module. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at all of these in a little bit more detail later on. So let's look at some examples. These are kind of common user-defined fields that I've seen out there as I've done this training and I've talked with customers. Location is a big one. So location might be something like Canada or St. Louis, or it could be building 4. Once again, it's entirely up to you guys how you want to set these up. But you can run location reports and say, you know, how much PPE is my Michigan plant using as opposed to the plant that I have in Utah, or you know, how much money are they spending on cutting tools at this particular location, or you could do it by project. You want to dictate or you want to determine how much is being used at a particular project. Your account numbers, this is where the cost center part of the user-defined fields come into play. If you need to dictate, we just say that whenever somebody is issuing items, they're going to issue it against this account number. You can put in those account numbers, you can hard code it just like we saw on that other screen. You can set departments, so you can run metrics for like you could even run it against the time that somebody logs in. So I can run reports that tell me, well, my welding department is always on time every morning, but my paint department, those guys come in, you know, in dribs and drabs. I can tell by when those items are, by what time those items are being issued. So you can really get creative and really pull just all kinds of data out of these user-defined fields. Once again, asset tracking. Even if you're not using preventive maintenance, you can still set up assets. So you can run reports like, I'm sorry, my cat is meowing at me. So you can run reports like, well, how often is oil being issued to that work truck? Maybe it's time to replace that work truck. You know, I'm running this this report that's showing all the costs. Now, I wanted to point out some advanced options that are available through user-defined fields. One of the primary ones is called dynamic filtering, and what that does is that allows you to narrow down a list of responses based on what the user selected in the previous question. So, for example, I may have a user-defined field called region with a list of continents that a person would select when they log into ATR. And then the next question after that is what city they're in, with a nice long list of cities. Well, I can make it so that if the person selects North America, they only see North American cities. It lowers that list. It saves a little bit of time, and once again, it reduces the possibility for error. Same thing for Europe. I can say only show me the European cities or only show me the Asian cities. So that's dynamic filtering, and we'll take a look at how to set that up. You can also set up item restrictions. For example, let's say I have a user-defined field called craft, or occupation, job, specialty, that kind of thing. I can say, well, if the person logging in is a welder, or if they select welder as their craft, maybe they can get the tinted safety glasses and the welding nozzles. But if they log in as a painter, they get a different set of items. They get white tape and a paint marker. Even though this is the same crib, they're getting a different list of available items based on what they selected. You know, when somebody's a QA person, so they might have access to the voltage meter. Okay, so once again, if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop my a second. Hang on one second. I'm actually going to stop my video just to give us all a little bit more real estate. And I'm going to open up ATR here, just so you guys can see what I'm referring to when we talk about user-defined fields or cost centers. So somebody approaches the machine, let's say it's Kevin here. He walks up to that pro stock, he logs in. He's going to see some cost centers here that he has to select from. Now, you may notice that these are color-coded. We've got a yellow backing on the region, we've got a red one on location, and then we've got greens down the list here. What that means is yellow means that this is the cost center that we're on, and this is the selection we have to make. This is red because this is telling me that this is a required UDF field. And since I don't have anything selected, it's showing me that currently that is an unacceptable entry because it's required, so I have to have data in there. These greens, I have all of these set up as optional in my database. So I don't have to put anything into these fields if I don't want to. That's why it's set up as green. So I can really, when you select a user-defined field, you can come up here and type it in, or you can just select it from the list. That's also doable. And then once you select them, you're able to actually get into your list of items. As we can see right here, Kevin is probably has a craft of QA. That's why it's only showing me the voltage meter. So as you can see, all of these options, they work regardless of whether or not you're in the client or in ATR. So let's see what this looks like in the client. So here I am in CribMaster. Now I know most people will issue their items through ATR, but so some of you may know if you have a manned crib, you can issue from the client. That's done from the actions ribbon and the issue item screen. And once it comes up, of course, with any screen, CribMaster is going to add red X's to any field that's required. So right now it's asking me, I need to pick the person I'm issuing an item to. So I will select that from my list. And then down here, I have got it looks like the only required UDF field I have is for department. The rest of these are optional, so there are no red X's. So I can select anything I like down here. I can put in different fields and then go ahead and issue my items. And it'll go ahead and issue these. It's acting a little slow. I think my internet is kind of slow here. Let me look at the chat while we're looking at that. Okay. There we go. All right. So now that those items are issued, if they are returnable items, I can go to my return screen. Sorry about that. One of the options that I have turned on is that it prints an issue list whenever I do an issue. So it's pausing to print that list out. But at any rate, when you're returning items, one of the options you have is you can actually enter in a user-defined field that was selected when the items were issued. That will narrow down this list of returnable items. So that's another use. And like I said before, all of these fields are trackable. So if I go to my transaction screen, you can see that issue that I just did a few seconds ago. And if I open that up, when you look at the properties, you can actually see which user-defined fields were used. And notice that this is actually open. So I can come back here if I have the proper privileges, and I can change those user-defined values if I need to. Maybe an account number changed or a name changed. I can come back here and change these as needed. So on my home ribbon right here, you can actually see my user-defined fields. If you're looking at your own CribMaster, you might not see these exact fields. You may see something different, but these are your UDFs. I'll go ahead and open up my department here. And these are all of the options that people have to select from when they log into ATR or when they're issuing items from the client. I can easily add new ones using this little plus icon. I can simply type in the name of my new user-defined field. And in addition to that, if I'm using site filtering, I can make this response site-specific. So for example, if I select Facom, then only people who work at the Facom site will be able to access this particular cost center. So I can set it. I have it's one of the many customization options that I have. Now, at this point, I'm going to point out something that's a little bit more advanced, and it's answers to the question: how do you actually name this department and cell and machine? Because when you start using CribMaster for the first time, this space on your home ribbon is going to be blank. So to set these up and to configure them, I'm going to go to my system ribbon, and I'm going to go down to system options, and then I'm going to select user-defined fields. And here's the screen where you set everything up. The first thing you do is you put in the actual screen label. The screen label is what is going to show up on your ATR screen. Your menu text, that's what's going to show up here on the ribbon. And then you have some options on how these are handled during your transactions. Most commonly, your issue transactions. So you can see the My Department is required. Remember, it had that red X. And then down here, we have a bunch of optionals. So that's why you did not see the red X, or you might remember seeing a bunch of greens in ATR. Now, something that's less common, but for those of you using preventive maintenance, we do have the work order transaction options. So just like with the standard issue, you can make them optional or required. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that the difference between a user-defined field and a custom field is that a custom field is created from scratch. You're actually altering the database and adding a table. But with user-defined fields, those tables are already created. They're labeled users 1 through user 6. You don't have to match them up to these numbers if you don't want to, but those are tables that are blank, and they're basically reserved for setting up these user-defined fields. Now, down here, notice my freeform field. What makes this a freeform field is simple. I don't select a table name. I just leave that as none, and that tells the software that this is a field that people can just type freeform into. This other column, barcodes, if you are using a barcode reader at the ATR or even in your manned crib, these little switches, D, C, M, L, those are codes that are basically telling CribMaster what type of field this is. So if I scan a barcode that begins with a D and a hyphen, it knows, oh, he means department, or he means line or machine. Now, there are a few barcodes that are reserved by CribMaster. You can't use I because we reserve that for item. B is reserved for bin. E is reserved for employee. But pretty much any other switch you can definitely use here in the barcode column. Now, earlier during the PowerPoint, I mentioned dynamic filtering and the ability to determine what items are available, or what options are available, depending on what people select in a previous question. So right here, I'm saying, I'm telling CribMaster to base the options under cell depending on what the user selects under department. And let me show you what that means, or what that looks like. If I go to my home ribbon and I open up my cell, and let me just pick one of these at random, notice I've got a tab on the end that says department assignments. This tab only exists because I told CribMaster to filter this off of user 1. Now, why does this say department assignments? Because department is the name of my first user-defined field. So it's going to be named after whatever that field is. So if I select department assignments, and let's say that I pick these engine related options here. Yeah, we'll go with automobile and diesel engine. So what that means is that when a user logs into ATR, if they select any of these checked options, then fuel modifications will be available for them to select in the next question. If they do not select that, if they select like development instead, they will not see fuel modifications as an available option. It just won't be in the list. So I can dictate what they can see based on what they selected in the first section. Now the other option right here where I've got it set to restricted, what that does is it adds another little helpful tab. Notice this is under my machine user-defined field. So if I go to my machine user-defined field and I open up, say, spot welder, notice I have an assigned items tab. Now you may notice that in this particular one, I've got these other ones, these other tabs as well, run units, asset information. That's because I have my enable preventive maintenance checked. That was what turns on those other tabs. But with assigned items, I can come in here and I can say, okay, spot welder. If they pick spot welder, I want to make sure that they're able to get those tinted safety glasses. Maybe I want to make sure they have the proper welding nozzles. So what I'm doing is I'm basically putting these items on reserve. I'm telling the CribMaster, only make these items available to people who select spot welder as their machine response. Otherwise, if they pick something else, if they pick lathe, welding nozzles will not show up in their list of items. Now, all of these unchecked items, those are going to show up as well, but the ones that are checked are the ones that will only show up when spot welder is selected. If I were to come back to the screen and I would also click the exclude unrestricted checkbox, then what will happen is only the items that are checked are going to show up. So these unchecked items will be left off the list. So somebody selects spot welder, those are the only items they're going to see. Now, right now, where we are right now, the system ribbon and system options, these are the options available globally. So whatever you set up here is going to be inherited by every site and crib that is attached to the database. But you do have the option of making site and crib specific changes. So for example, I'm going to open up a site profile. Go ahead and close that. And we'll open up Facom. And on the main screen for the site information, there is this checkbox here called Override User-Defined Field Configuration for this site. I'm going to go ahead and check that, and I'll save it. And look at what we got there. We got a new tab, User-Defined Field Configuration. Looks similar to the tab that we had earlier, but we don't have quite as many options. We don't have the restricted items or the dynamic filtering options. That can only be set at the global level. But I can come in here and I can say, well, you know, department is good for a nice global setting, but maybe at this particular site, they don't call it department, they call it section. So maybe there's a proprietary term for the people at this site. Or it could be, and this is germane to Drieten's job. Drieten works in Europe. Could be this site is in a different country and they have a different translation for department. You know, departamento or whatever it is. You can put in the translation because that's the country they're located in. And then, you know, once again, you have your abilities to make these optional or required, and you could also set default values. You could say, well, for the people at this particular site, all they work on is jet engines, so there's no need for them to pick anything else. I'm going to set that default, and it'll save them some time. And once again, it'll it'll lower the possibility that they'll select something by mistake. Now you've got all of these options also available at the crib level. So I'm going to open up my Facom toolbox, and on my Advanced tab is going to be that checkbox. There it is. Override user-defined field configuration. I'll save that, and we get a tab here. Looks just like the one we had at this site level. All the same options as well. So the question occasionally comes up, what if you set something globally, and then you set it at the site level, and then at that same site, you set an entirely different set of options at the crib level? Well, the main rule for CribMaster is that local always trumps global. So when CribMaster is engaging the database for those user-defined fields, it's going to check what is set at the crib level first. If the crib level doesn't have anything set, it'll check the site level. If you don't have anything set at the site level, it will fall back to just what's available, what was set up at the global level. Now, something else I want to point out, and this is important. Let's say that I do come in here and I say section instead of department. When I run reports against this user-defined field, I have to run it by department. Screen label, what you see up here, this is what you pick when you are running your reports. You won't see section, you'll see department. So just keep that in mind if you're looking through your reports and you're like, I can't find section. It's because it's using the screen label instead. So something I pointed out during the PowerPoint, I mentioned cost controls and how you can set it up so that you can't go over a certain value. You can do that. I'm going to open up just a random selection here. That is set up here on the History tab. So you can set up your week to dates, $50, maybe $500, $5,000. And by default, CribMaster will not prevent people from going over this amount. It will simply red flag it so that when you run your red flag reports, you'll be able to run it against these individual cost centers, and it will tell you all the times that those, or employee, and it'll tell you all the times that they have gone over their limits. But if you want to actually enforce those limits and make sure nobody goes over $50 when they select fuel modifications, you can lock that down. You can basically enforce the limit there, and that's an option that you would turn on under System Options, Configuration, and then under Issue and Return Options and Item Limits, there is this checkbox, Enable Red Flag Expenditure Limits. I can check that box, and now CribMaster will not let me go over those limits when I select that cell. Now, once again, that can be overridden at the time, but that is a way to kind of keep your costs under control based on what they pick from their cost centers. Now, another thing that I do want to point out, when you are running your purchase orders, let's say that you are going to order, you're going to set up a purchase order for some items, and we'll say, for example, this large blue plastic, I guess they were trying to say box, or maybe Bix is a tool I'm not familiar with. But if I open up the properties for that particular PO, I do have this tab down here called Cost Centers. Remember that cost centers and user-defined fields are the same thing, kind of interchangeable. So I can put in cost centers to add some more context to why these items are being purchased. Now I can even do that after the fact. If I go to my Edit Purchase Order screen and I am looking at a closed PO. This is a PO that has already been received. The items are already sitting in their crib. I can still come back here and make those changes. You have to make them at the item level. So I would right click on the item, go to my line properties, and I can enter in that information. So even after the item has been received, I can assign a user-defined field value to that item. Okay, so that is basically everything. Let me see what kind of questions we have here in the chat. My mouse will work. There we go, chat.
Yeah, and I got one very good question that I would like to put out to everyone. And
Sure.
it was, are these sessions going to be available? Yes, we are recording this, and we will send out a link to all participants so that you can watch it at your leisure and take notes and play around with it while you have the video running.
Mm-hmm. Oh, one thing I do want to point out that I neglected to mention. Let me come back to this screen. System options. System options, user-defined fields. So when you come to the screen and you make changes, at the very least, when you save it, CribMaster will have to restart this application. Now, if you are connected to the database using a web service, and if you don't know what that means, if I go to my data source and I have a web service entered in here, if that's the case, once I make changes here and save it, not only does the application have to restart, but the application pool on the web server will have to be refreshed or recycled. I'm sure some of you are out there going, what does that mean? Your web administrator will know exactly what I'm talking about. But you will not see any changes made to the configuration here until that app pool is recycled. Okay, so what other, okay, we have a question.
All right, yep, we got a few questions, Ed. Ed, do you want to pop your video back on for us since we're done the demo and we can answer questions?
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, so a couple of questions came through, and I know Kevin was answering them through the chat, but I thought they were probably worth just talking through verbally as well for the whole group. Mm-hmm. So the question was, sorry, let me find it in the chat box. The question was from Prime Decent, and it was, so would it be best practice to not set anything globally and set everything site crib specific? So Kevin, I thought you gave a really good answer. Do you want to just kind of talk through some of that for the group?
Yeah, you're talking to me or to?
Well, Kevin responded in the chat, and so I thought maybe we could just go through what he said, and then everyone else, Drayton and Ed, feel free to chime in as well.
Sure.
Hey, Kevin, you're on mute.
Dang it, technology. The question was basically, should they focus on the local settings and just kind of ignore the global settings? And my answer was, if you want specific detailed reporting about the local transactions, then yes, then I would absolutely turn those on and use those almost exclusively. But keeping in mind that in order to get to that, you have to at least fill in the global settings. They have to have a starting point. You won't be able to use the local settings unless you come up with some generic, for lack of a better term, global settings. But the detailed reporting you're going to be able to get if you use those local settings at the crib or the bin level is phenomenal. So I absolutely encourage that. Excuse me.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. We had another question from Chad who posted to the question and answer chat box. He says, how can CribMaster enforce red flag limits when the transaction value isn't calculated until after the transaction is booked? So if the limit is $50 a week and I've issued $59 so far, how does CribMaster know my next transaction with an item price of $5 pushes me over? He has another question, but let me answer that one first. CribMaster only knows the value if you have an item price issued for that item. So it will do a calculation before the transaction is booked. And then it will dictate whether or not that transaction can be completed based on that calculation. Now, you also had another question, how will that work in a weigh station where there are no issues until the door is closed? Well, with a weigh station, that's kind of different. Weigh station is a passive device. So if you are looking to really lock down your inventory and put in cost restrictions, I would use something like a Pro Stock or a toolbox, some sort of an interactive device. Weigh stations are more of a free-for-all. They're more meant for expendable, low-cost items. So like I wouldn't put cutting tools or something like that in a weigh station. So yeah, with a weigh station, that logic doesn't work as well. Just to let you know.
I just wanted to add about the previous question that if there is some credit left, I have tested it on the CribMaster. The system will still allow that transaction happen, even there is, let's say, $1 still left, but the price is like $5. So the transaction will happen. Therefore, however, the next transaction won't happen any longer. So you can go beyond the limit of $50 a week or whatever the question was, with even though there is a little credit left in the account. Therefore, it is possible, but that will be the end of it. There won't be any further transactions.
Right. So Chad has a follow-up. Assuming all the items in the machine have a cost associated with them, you're saying that if I indicate I'm issuing one piece, CribMaster will calculate that one piece at $5 and know that if the issue happens, I break the red flag and will deny the transaction. So I was a little wrong on that. Drayton corrected me. It will allow that transaction as long as you have some leeway, but it will still red flag it, and it will lock down any further transactions without manager approval. And okay. You've always found red flags to be reactive and not proactive. Yeah, and they're not for everybody. They're really just kind of depends on what your specific needs are. Yeah, I mean, red flags are typically just used for reporting purposes. I don't know a lot of customers that actually put that restriction in place. But yeah, that is an option if that's what you guys are looking for.
And remember that we have other ways to put restrictions on individuals and items. So there's a lot of setup you can do if you're really worried about locking down the material, then maybe this isn't the best answer, but it certainly gives you the reporting to know when you're exceeding limits and things like that. But if you want an absolute lockdown, we have other restrictions that we can use for that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, a couple other questions. Is there a limit to how many UDFs you can have?
Yes, you are limited to six user-defined fields. If you need anything more than that, then at that point you'll have to create a custom field.
Okay.
But remember that those 6 fields have a lot of customization available to you because of the dynamic filtering.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, is there a limit one level deeper with how many options within each user-defined field you can have? Like, is there a limit on how many crafts you could list or regions or anything like that?
You can have as many as you like.
Okay.
We have customers that have thousands of options there.
Great. Okay, I have a question about custom fields, and I'll get back to that one. But I want to answer this one first. Is there a way to test the UDFs before deploying to the site?
The only real way to test them, really testing anything, is to have a sandbox environment available to do all of your testing in. We really recommend that if that's possible. If you're hosting with us, setting up a sandbox is really easy. You contact your sales contact, and they will work with our professional services to create one for you. But really, with anything, once you turn it on, it's turned on. The only way to test it is to have a separate test environment.
May I add something more about that, Amanda? What I just said is that it's very important to know that any kind of modification, data editing, that the administrator will be doing in the CM client under the user-defined field tab will need to pass 24 hours in order to become active, because the system will need to reboot the pool where the CM, the database is being hosted. Therefore, whatever they will do right there, it won't be active immediately afterwards. They have to wait a certain period of, we tell pretty much 24 hours in order to become active. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Ed was mentioning earlier. That reset has to happen on the computer where your database is. You can't do that remotely from your desktop unless you happen to be hosting the database on that desktop, right? So that's why it takes a while.
Yeah, and it's really the 24 hours is really just for people using web services. And I say that knowing that most of our customers use web services. But if you are using a local SQL connection, all you have to do is restart the application and it's good to go.
True.
Now, if you do know the person who maybe you're really desperate to push through that update, it's got to go through. I can't wait 24 hours. You can contact your web administrator and they can go in and just push it through manually. But generally speaking, it takes you're looking at the web server to do its usual 24-hour sync.
Gotcha. Okay. And then we got a question just asking to expand a little bit more on the difference between custom fields and UDFs. And I don't know if this is the right webinar to go into detail on custom fields, but can we just talk a little bit about how they're different and how you would go about setting one up? Or
Sure.
if that's something that's even possible to do out in the field independently?
Now, well, I mean, out in the field, I'm not sure if you mean like at a customer site. Keep in mind, custom fields are not, I wouldn't say they're hard to set up, but I would really recommend you talk to our support folks first, unless you're just really database savvy. Just simply because it's easy to get into trouble if you're not sure what you're doing. Basically, and it's done under database utilities and custom fields. You can basically come up and okay. All right. Well, I just got my hand slapped. All right. So I can't do it when I'm on a web service. I think the person who owns the web service would have to do it on their end. Okay, well, let me on the screen anyway. But basically, it just allows you to come in and set up a field on a particular table. In this case, this is the inventory table, and allows you to put in similar information about what you're validating against. I'm sorry, I forgot I was on camera. So at any rate. Yeah, these are really locked down, so you really need high-level privileges to be able to do that. And if you're using a web service, the person who's administering your web service will have to do that for you. Now, in practice, I'll open up an item so you guys can see what the custom fields look like. So under the item properties, they're going to be on the More tab, and they're going to be listed down here at the bottom of the screen under the custom fields section.
A typical usage of that, I just wanted to illustrate what Ed was saying, is that, for instance, for our European customers, we are using the custom fields to introduce different translations of the items that will be appearing on the ATR. So it is really customized, specific field that the customer is asking for. Therefore, we will come with the right translation of the item or any additional info they would like to attach to be visible in reporting or the ATR. So therefore, it's a separate work that is being done based on the customer needs.
Right.
A fun example I've seen of a custom field was one of our customers. The company mandated, or I'm sorry, they were mandated to provide safety shoes for all of their employees. So they created custom fields on the employee tab with everyone's shoe size, so that when it came time to reorder, they just ran a report and had everyone's shoe size, so they didn't have to bother anyone or slow anything down. It was very simple, but you can visualize that, right?
That's cool. Okay.
And by the way, you can run reports against custom fields because you've created a table in the database.
That's all the questions that I've seen come through so far. We have a couple more minutes, so if anyone has a question or anything else they'd like us to expand on a little bit more, feel free to chat it in the chat box or in the Q&A box. We'll wait a couple more minutes. Going once.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's hungry for lunch.
Huh.
Going twice.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. This was really helpful. I think it was a great session. So like I said, we will send out the recording via email. It's also, all of our sessions are posted on YouTube. Oh, we just got a question. Oh, thank you. You're welcome, Porfirio. Thank you for coming. So like I said, all of our sessions are posted on YouTube too. So if you don't follow us on YouTube, I definitely recommend it because we're really building a great library of content there for you guys. Obviously the resource site's a great resource as well as Blue Volt, but YouTube's maybe a little bit easier sometimes to get into if you're just looking for something quick. So definitely check that out. Rick, you're very welcome. Rick says lots of great info, been using CM for 18 years and still learned a few tips. That's awesome. So thank you guys for coming. Look out for our email. And if you can think of any questions after the fact, feel free to send us an email, reach out to your account manager, and we'll get in touch with you guys. Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you, everybody.
See everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.